She'd said no 3 times already, but her cousin wouldn't let it go. Just one coffee, she'd pleaded over the phone the night before. He's not like the others, quiet, kind, doesn't talk about himself all the time. That last part almost made her laugh. Everyone talked about themselves these days, especially on dates. But something in her cousin's voice, that mix of hope and gentle insistence, wore her down. So she said yes, not because she believed it would lead anywhere, but because saying no again felt cruel. It had been a long stretch of disappointments. The last guy had ghosted her after she mentioned she liked hiking more than clubbing. Before that, there was the one who spent their entire dinner talking about his crypto portfolio like it was poetry, and the one before that, he'd asked halfway through dessert if she'd ever consider being a stay-at-home girlfriend. She'd paid her half of the bill and walked out without another word. After that, she'd told herself she was done with dating apps, done with setups, done with hoping someone would see her for more than her job title or her Instagram aesthetic. But here she was again, standing outside a little diner on the edge of the neighborhood, checking her watch and wondering why she'd agreed. The diner wasn't fancy, just a narrow storefront with a red awning, fogged-up windows, and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting out every time the door opened. It was the kind of place people went when they wanted to be left alone. Perfect, she thought. If this went badly, at least no one would be watching. She pushed the door open, a bell jingling overhead. Inside it was warm and slightly noisy, clinking plates, low chatter, the hiss of the grill. She scanned the room. Only a few booths were taken. Then she saw him. He was sitting in the far corner, back to the wall, hands wrapped around a mug. Worn jeans, scuffed boots, a flannel shirt that had seen better days. His dark hair was a little messy, like he'd run his hands through it on the way over. He looked up as she approached, and his eyes, warm brown, steady, met hers without hesitation. No nervous glances, no fake smile, just a quiet nod. "You must be her," he said, standing quickly. "I'm Daniel." "Yeah," she replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thanks for meeting me." "No, thank you," he said, sitting back down. "I know blind dates aren't exactly everyone's idea of a good time." She almost smiled. "You could say that." A waitress came by and they ordered coffee, black for him with a splash of oat milk for her. When the waitress left, there was a beat of silence. Not awkward, just still. She braced herself for the usual questions. "What do you do? How long have you lived here? Do you like dogs or cats?" But he didn't ask any of that. Instead, he looked out the window for a second, then back at her. "I saw a red-tailed hawk this morning," he said, like it was the most natural thing to say on a first date. "Perched on the old water tower near the park. Just sitting there watching everything. Made me stop and look up for once." She blinked. "Really?" "Yeah. You ever notice how most people walk with their heads down? Like the ground's got all the answers." He shrugged. "Sometimes I think we forget to look up." She didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't rehearsed. It didn't feel like a line. It just felt honest. And that was so rare. They talked after that, not about jobs or exes or bucket lists, but about small things. The way rain smells different in the city than in the countryside. How the best part of the day is that quiet hour just before sunset. He mentioned he'd been helping out at a community garden on weekends. "Not because I'm great at it," he added with a small laugh. "Mostly I just haul compost and listen to the older folks tell stories." She found herself relaxing. Really relaxing. Not the kind of fake calm she usually forced on dates where she smiled too much and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. This was different. He didn't try to impress her. Didn't name drop. Didn't even check his phone once. When their coffee came, he stirred his slowly, watching the steam rise. "I should probably warn you," he said quietly. "I don't have much to offer. I work odd jobs, warehouse stuff, sometimes deliveries. Rent's tight. I live in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, so if you were hoping for fancy dinners or weekend getaways, I'm not your guy." She looked at him surprised. Most men would have hidden that, spun it into something impressive. But he just laid it out there, no shame, no apology, just truth. "That's okay," she said, and meant it. "I've had enough of fancy. Sometimes simple is refreshing." He smiled then, a real one that reached his eyes. And for the first time in months, she felt like she was talking to a real person, not a performance. They stayed longer than she expected. Nearly an hour. When it was time to go, he reached for his wallet, pulling out a few crumpled bills and some coins. He counted them carefully, frowning slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, looking up. "I thought I had enough for both coffees, but I'm short by $1. He looked genuinely embarrassed. I can run to the ATM down the street. No, she said quickly. It's fine. I've got it. He hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. I'll pay you back next time. She almost said there wouldn't be a next time, but she didn't, because part of her hoped there might be. They stepped outside. The air had cooled and streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. He walked her to the bus stop, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the evening chill. You're not what I expected, he said after a moment. Good or bad? Good, he said without hesitation. Really good, she smiled. You're not what I expected either. They stood there in comfortable silence until her bus came. She climbed on, turned, and saw him still standing there giving a small wave. She waved back. On the ride home, she replayed the conversation in her head. No grand gestures. No promises. Just two people sharing coffee and quiet thoughts. It should have felt underwhelming. But it didn't. It felt human. Still, as she walked up to her apartment, doubt crept in. He was clearly struggling. She wasn't looking to be someone's savior. She'd dated guys like that before. Men who leaned too hard on her emotionally or financially, mistaking kindness for obligation. She couldn't go down that road again. But then she remembered the way he'd talked about the hawk. The way he listened, really listened when she spoke. The way he didn't flinch when admitting he couldn't cover the bill. There was dignity in that. A kind of quiet strength she hadn't seen in a long time. Back in her apartment, she kicked off her shoes and poured a glass of water. Her phone buzzed. A text from her cousin. So? How'd it go? She typed back. He's different. Nice, but he's broke. Like really broke. Her cousin replied instantly. So what? Is he kind? She stared at the message. That was the thing, wasn't it? Kindness didn't pay the bills, but it made life bearable. And lately, her life had felt more like a checklist than a life. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. She thought about Daniel, his rough hands, his calm voice, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered. Not like she was a prize to be won. Maybe it was foolish to give it another thought. Maybe she was setting herself up for disappointment again. But for the first time in a while, she didn't feel tired. She felt curious. And curiosity, she decided, was worth one more chance. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she found herself smiling at the memory of him describing the hawk. How he'd said it sat like it owned the sky but didn't need to prove it to anyone. She didn't know what it meant exactly. But it stayed with her. The next morning, she woke up to a text. Just 2 words, thank you, no emoji. No follow-up question. Just gratitude. She read it 3 times. Then she typed back, you're welcome. And don't worry about the $1. A minute passed. Then, I'll remember it. She put her phone down, made coffee, and got ready for work. But as she walked out the door, she caught herself glancing down the street, half hoping, half dreading, to see if he might be there, looking up at the sky again. He wasn't. But the thought of him lingered, like the smell of rain before a storm. Quiet, unexpected, and full of possibility. She didn't expect to hear from him again. Not really. Most guys vanished after a first date that ended with them short on cash, especially when the woman paid. But 2 days later, her phone buzzed with a message that wasn't from her cousin or a work group chat. Just a simple text. Hey, there's a park cleanup this Saturday morning. Thought you might like to join. No pressure. She read it 3 times. No flirty emojis. No hey beautiful or missed you. Just an invitation, plain and respectful. She almost didn't reply. But then she remembered how he'd talked about the community garden, how his eyes lit up when he mentioned the tomatoes they'd grown last summer. There was something real in that, something she hadn't felt in a long time, so she typed back. What time? Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather most people would use as an excuse to stay in bed. But she pulled on old jeans, a waterproof jacket, and sturdy shoes and headed to the park. She spotted him right away. Not because he stood out, but because he was already working. Kneeling in the mud near a storm drain, pulling out plastic bottles and soggy fast food wrappers, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, hair damp from the rain. He looked up when she approached, and his face broke into a quiet smile. You came. Yeah, she said, grabbing a spare pair of gloves from the volunteer table. Didn't want all the trash to feel lonely. He laughed, a warm, unguarded sound, and handed her a trash bag. "Watch out for the mud near the creek. It's sneakier than it looks." They worked side by side for hours, not talking much, just sharing the rhythm of picking up litter, sorting recyclables, occasionally pointing out a particularly stubborn piece of trash stuck in the bushes. At one point, she slipped on a wet patch of grass and landed hard on her backside. Instead of making a joke or pretending not to notice, he was there in a second, offering his hand without a word. His palm was rough but warm, and she felt a strange flutter, not from the fall but from the quiet care in his gesture. After the cleanup, a few volunteers gathered under a pavilion for coffee and donuts. Someone asked what they all did for work. When it was his turn, he just said, "I help out where I can." No details. No embellishment. She noticed how he listened more than he spoke, how he remembered the name of the retired teacher who'd brought homemade cookies, how he made sure the teenager who'd shown up alone didn't feel left out. On the walk back to the bus stop, the rain had eased to a mist. "Thanks for coming," he said. "It means a lot when people show up, not just for the cause but for each other." She looked at him. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," he said simply. "Most people are good. They just need a reason to remember it." That stuck with her, not as a quote to post online, but as something to carry in her chest. A week later, he texted again. This time it was about walking dogs at the animal shelter. "They're short on volunteers," he wrote. "And the dogs miss the park," she went. And again, he was already there, kneeling beside a nervous terrier mix, speaking softly, letting the dog sniff his hand before clipping on the leash. He didn't rush, didn't force anything, just waited until the dog was ready. They walked their dogs on opposite sides of the path at first, giving each other space. But halfway through, their paths merged, and they fell into easy conversation about how animals seem to know when you're having a bad day, about the way sunlight hits the lake in the late afternoon, about how hard it is to find quiet in a city that never sleeps. She learned he read a lot, library books mostly, fiction, history, even old philosophy. "Not because I'm smart," he'd said with a shrug, "just because stories help me understand people better." She told him about her job, designing logos and websites for small businesses. "Nothing glamorous," she said, "but it pays the bills." "Sounds important," he replied. "Helping people share what they care about? That's not nothing." No one had ever said that to her before. Most people assumed design was just making things pretty, but he saw the purpose behind it. After that, they started meeting more often, not as dates exactly, but as two people who enjoyed each other's company, coffee at the same diner, a walk through the botanical gardens on a Sunday morning, sitting on a bench watching kids feed ducks. Nothing fancy, nothing planned weeks in advance, just moments that felt natural, like they were supposed to happen. She noticed things about him, how he always held doors open, not just for her but for everyone, how he tipped generously, even when he clearly couldn't afford to, how he remembered small details, like how she took her coffee or that she hated the sound of styrofoam squeaking. One afternoon, they sat on a park bench sharing a bag of pretzels. A little girl ran past, chasing a balloon that had slipped from her hand. It floated higher and higher out of reach. The girl stopped, lip trembling. Without a word, he stood up, walked over, and knelt beside her. "Hey," he said gently, "that balloon's on an adventure now. Maybe it'll find a bird who needs a friend or land in a garden full of flowers." "It's not gone, it's just traveling." The girl sniffled, then nodded. "Do you think it'll come back?" "Maybe not the same one," he said, "but you'll get another. And it'll be just as bright." The girl smiled, wiped her eyes, and ran back to her mom. He returned to the bench, brushing dirt off his jeans. "You're good with kids," she said. He looked surprised. "I just didn't want her to feel sad about something she couldn't control." She realized then that he didn't do these things to impress anyone. He did them because it was who he was. Kindness wasn't a performance for him, it was just breathing. Still, the question lingered in the back of her mind. How did someone so thoughtful, so grounded, end up working odd jobs and living above a laundromat? He never complained about money, never asked for help, never acted like he was owed anything. But she saw the wear on his boots, the way he sometimes checked his phone like he was waiting for a call that never came. One evening, after helping serve meals at a homeless shelter, they walked to a bus stop in the dark. The city hummed around them. Cars, distant sirens, the clatter of a late-night food cart. Why do you do all this? She asked finally. The volunteering, the helping. You don't have to. Most people don't. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I used to think success meant having more. More money, more stuff, more people looking up to you. But the more I got, the lonelier I felt. Like I was playing a role, not living a life, she frowned. But you said you work odd jobs. He smiled faintly. Let's just say I've been relearning what matters. It was the closest he'd come to explaining his situation, and she didn't push. She respected that some stories take time to tell. What surprised her most was how comfortable she felt with him. With other guys, she'd always been on guard, wondering if they were judging her job, her apartment, her choices. But with him, she could just be. She could talk about her fears, about getting older, about feeling stuck, about wondering if she'd ever find someone who truly saw her, and he wouldn't try to fix it. He'd just listen, and sometimes that was enough. One rainy Tuesday, she found herself texting him just to say she'd seen a red-tailed hawk near her office. It reminded me of what you said, she wrote. His reply came quickly. Did it look like it owned the sky? She smiled. Yeah, and it didn't seem to care if anyone noticed. They met for coffee the next day. He brought a book, a worn copy of The Alchemist, and said, I thought you might like this. The library's copy was due back, but I couldn't stop thinking about this line. When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. He handed it to her. Keep it, I've got another. She took it, touched. You're always giving things away. Not giving, he corrected gently. Sharing. As the weeks passed, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No grand confessions or sudden declarations. But she started looking forward to his texts. Started noticing the way his laugh sounded like relief. Started saving little moments to tell him. Like the old man who played saxophone on the subway or the stray cat that had adopted her fire escape. And he did the same. He'd send her photos of sunsets from the community garden. Leave voice notes describing the smell of rain on dry earth. Once, he showed up at her door with 2 paper cups of boba tea, her favorite kind, the one she'd mentioned in passing weeks ago. How did you remember that? She asked, stunned. He just shrugged. It seemed important to you. That was the thing. He paid attention. Not in a creepy way, but in the way someone does when they genuinely care. She began to let her guard down. Allowed herself to hope just a little that maybe this could be something real. Not perfect, not easy, but real still. A part of her stayed cautious. Because the world had taught her that good things often came with hidden costs. That kindness could be a mask. That people who seemed too good to be true usually were. But every time she doubted, he'd do something small that reminded her why she trusted him. Like the time he stayed late to help her carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs when her building's elevator was broken. Or when he noticed she was stressed about a work deadline and showed up with soup in silence. No questions, just presence. One evening, as they sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and violet, she turned to him and said, You know, I used to think love was supposed to be exciting. Big gestures, constant passion, fireworks. He looked at her, waiting, but now I think maybe it's quieter than that. Maybe it's just showing up, day after day, even when it's raining, even when you're tired. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Just once, briefly, like a promise. Yeah, he said softly, I think you're right. And in that moment, surrounded by the ordinary beauty of a city evening, she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. Not because everything was figured out, but because she wasn't alone in the figuring. She didn't know where this was going. Didn't know if he'd ever have more than a few dollars in his pocket, or if they'd ever take a vacation together. But she knew this. Being with him made her feel like the best version of herself. And that was worth more than any grand romance. As they walked home under the streetlights, shoulders almost touching, she realized she wasn't waiting for a miracle anymore. She was living in one quiet, honest moment at a time. The rain came down hard that afternoon, sudden and sharp, the kind that soaks you to the bone in seconds. She'd been walking back from a client meeting, umbrella-less and already regretting her choice of shoes when the downpour hit. She ducked into the nearest building, breathless and dripping, just wanting to wait it out. It was a sleek office tower downtown, glass, steel, the kind of place that smelled like money and disinfectant. She stood just inside the lobby, shaking water off her sleeves, trying not to drip on the polished floor. That's when she saw it. On a massive digital screen mounted near the elevators, a man's face filled the display. Sharp jawline, calm eyes, expensive-looking suit. The headline beneath read, Alexander Sterling announces $50 million investment in urban green technology. Her breath caught, because it was him. Not exactly, but yes. The eyes. The way his brow furrowed slightly when he spoke. The quiet confidence in his posture. It was the man she'd been seeing for weeks. The one who wore flannel shirts, counted change at diners, and volunteered at the animal shelter. Only now he was dressed like someone who owned half the city, standing in front of a crowd of reporters, talking about sustainability and community impact like he'd been born to do it. She stood frozen, heart pounding. A security guard gave her a curious look, but she barely noticed. She fumbled for her phone, fingers trembling as she typed his name into the search bar. What came up made her stomach drop. Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations, tech billionaire, Forbes 30 under 40, philanthropist, reclusive, rarely gave interviews, known for disappearing for months at a time to reconnect with reality. And there, in a 2-year-old profile photo, was the same face, clean-shaven, hair neatly combed, standing beside a luxury car she couldn't even name. But it was him. No doubt she scrolled faster. Articles about his company's clean energy projects, his anonymous donations to food banks, rumors that he'd once worked undercover in a factory to understand labor conditions, and then a recent quote, "Wealth distorts truth. I wanted to meet someone who saw me, not my bank account." Her hands went cold all those quiet walks. The shared coffee. The way he listened like every word mattered. Had it all been an act? A social experiment? Was she just another data point in some billionaire's quest for authenticity? She stepped back out into the rain, not caring that she was getting soaked again. The city blurred around her. Cars, lights, voices, all muffled by the roaring in her ears. She felt foolish, used, like she'd been playing a part in a story she didn't even know she was in. By the time she got home, she was shaking, not from the cold, but from anger. She paced her apartment, replaying every moment. The way he'd said he worked odd jobs. The way he'd apologized for not being able to pay for coffee. The way he'd talked about feeling lonely at the top. Had that been real? Or just a well-rehearsed line? She wanted to call him, to scream, to demand an explanation, but she didn't, because part of her was terrified of what he'd say. What if he laughed? What if he said, "Yeah, I was just curious what it'd be like to date a regular person." She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, her phone buzzed early. A text from him. "Can I see you?" She stared at the screen. Her first instinct was to block him, to erase him from her life like a bad dream, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the rawness in those 3 words. Maybe it was the memory of him kneeling in the rain to comfort a little girl. Maybe it was the hope, however small, that there was more to this than deception. She didn't reply. But she didn't say no either. An hour later, there was a knock at her door. She opened it slowly, half expecting a stranger in a suit. But it was him, still in that same flannel shirt, hair damp from the morning drizzle, holding 2 paper cups of boba tea. Her favorite kind. The one with extra tapioca. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept either. "I know," he said before she could speak. "I know what you saw." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "So it's true," he nodded. "My name is Alexander Sterling. I'm the CEO of Sterling Innovations. I've been living differently for the past 6 months. Not as a gimmick, not as a game. I needed to remember who I was before the money, before the titles, before everyone started treating me like I was made of glass." She didn't move. "And me, was I part of that remembering?" He flinched. "No, not like that. I didn't set out to meet you. I went to that diner because it's where I always go when I'm trying to think. And when your cousin asked if I'd go on a blind date, I said yes because I was tired of being alone. Not because I wanted to study you. I wanted to know you, then why lie?" Her voice cracked. "Why not just tell me who you really were?" "Because I was scared," he said quietly. "Scared that if you knew, you'd treat me like everyone else does, with caution or awe or expectation. I wanted you to see me, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just the guy who likes sunsets and hates traffic and cries at dog rescue videos." She looked away. You made me feel like I was special, like I was seen, but it was all based on a lie. It wasn't a lie, he insisted, stepping closer. Everything I said was true. The way I feel about you, that's real. The things I care about, the garden, the shelter, the people, that's all real. The only thing that wasn't real was the name I used. But even that, Daniel was my grandfather's name. It meant something to me. She turned back to him, eyes burning. Do you have any idea how it feels to find out the person you're starting to trust is someone completely different? That everything you thought you knew was staged? I do, he said, voice low, because I've lived my whole adult life feeling that way. People smile at me, but they're looking past me, at my wallet, my influence, my connections. I've had friends who only called when they needed funding. Dates who asked about my net worth before dessert. I didn't want that with you. I wanted honesty, even if it meant starting with a half-truth. She was silent for a long time. Rain tapped against the window behind her. Why now? She finally asked. Why tell me like this? Because I couldn't keep pretending, he said. Every time I looked at you, I saw someone who deserved better than secrets. And I realized, if I lost you because of who I really am, then I didn't deserve you anyway. He held out one of the boba teas. I know you might never forgive me, but I had to try. She didn't take the drink, but she didn't shut the door either. Go home, Alexander, she said softly. Or Daniel. Or whoever you are. I need time, he nodded, eyes full of regret. Take all the time you need. He turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, the untouched boba tea still in his hand. For the next 2 days, she didn't answer his calls or texts. She threw herself into work, into cleaning her apartment, into anything that would keep her mind off the storm inside her chest. But his words kept coming back. I wanted you to see me. Was that so wrong? To want to be loved for who you are, not what you have. She thought about all the times he'd shown up without fanfare, without expectation. The way he'd remembered her favorite tea. The way he'd stayed quiet when she needed silence. The way he'd looked at her like she was enough, exactly as she was. Those things couldn't be faked, could they? On the 3rd day, she found herself walking to the community garden. She didn't know why. Maybe to prove to herself he wasn't there. Maybe to see if the place still felt the same without him. But he was there, kneeling in the same patch of soil she'd seen him in weeks ago, hands deep in the earth, planting seedlings. Wearing the same worn jeans, the same flannel shirt. No bodyguards. No assistants. Just him, the dirt, and the quiet hum of the city in the distance. He looked up when she approached, but didn't stand. Didn't speak. Just waited. She stood at the edge of the garden bed, arms crossed. You're really here. Not hiding. Not performing. I come here every Saturday, he said. Long before you knew me. Long before I disappeared from the public eye. This place, it keeps me grounded. She watched him gently press soil around a young tomato plant. His movements were careful, deliberate. The same hands that signed million-dollar deals were now tending to something fragile and alive. Why this garden? She asked. My mom used to grow tomatoes on our fire escape when I was a kid, he said, not looking up. We didn't have much, but she said fresh food made us rich in ways money couldn't. When I started making real money, I funded a dozen urban farms. But I missed the feeling of getting my hands dirty, of growing something real. She took a step closer. So all of it, the volunteering, the odd jobs, the simple life, it wasn't just an act. It was a return, he said, to who I used to be, who I still am, underneath everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then you should have told me. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. Not because I regret meeting you as Daniel, but because I hurt you by not trusting you with the truth sooner. She looked at him, really looked. Not at the CEO, not at the disguise, but at the man who'd shared his last donut with a stray dog, who'd stayed up late listening to her fears, who carried a library book in his back pocket like it was treasure. Maybe the name was a lie, but the heart? That felt true. I don't know if I can forget this, she said honestly, but I don't want to lose what we had either. He finally looked up, eyes searching hers. Then let's start over. No secrets this time, just us. She didn't say yes, not yet. But she didn't walk away. Instead, she knelt beside him in the dirt, picked up a trowel, and began planting beside him, side by side in the quiet truth of the moment. She didn't forgive him right away. That wasn't how it worked, not for her. Trust wasn't a light switch you could flip back on after it had been broken. It was more like a plant. Fragile, slow-growing, and easy to kill if you weren't careful. For days after the garden, she kept her distance. Not cold, not cruel, but careful. She answered his texts with short replies. She didn't cancel their plans, but she didn't suggest new ones either. She watched him. Not with suspicion, but with quiet attention, like someone studying a puzzle they weren't sure they wanted to solve. He didn't push, didn't flood her with apologies or grand gestures. He just showed up on time, honest, and without pretense. When they met for coffee, he didn't pretend to be poor. But he also didn't suddenly start talking about private jets or board meetings. He just talked about his day, about the new compost system at the garden, about how he'd spent an hour helping an elderly neighbor fix her Wi-Fi. One afternoon, she asked the question that had been gnawing at her. Do you ever go back to that life? The suits, the meetings, the everything? He stirred his coffee slowly. I have to sometimes. The company has thousands of employees. People depend on it. But I'm not the same person I was before I met you. How so? I used to think I had to be perfect, always in control, always decisive, always strong. But being with you, you made it okay to just be human, to not have all the answers, to admit when I'm scared. She looked down at her cup. I was scared too, scared that I'd fallen for a version of you that didn't exist. I know, he said softly, and I hate that I made you feel that way. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the cafe wrapping around them like a blanket. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that the kindness she'd seen wasn't just a role he'd played, but a part of who he truly was. But the fear lingered, like a bruise that still ached when pressed. Then one evening everything shifted. She'd been working late, stressed over a project deadline, when her phone buzzed. It was him. Not a text, a call she almost didn't answer, but something in her gut said to pick up. Hey, he said, voice quiet. I know you're busy, but I'm outside your building. She frowned. Why? I brought soup. And silence. No questions. No expectations, just, if you want company. She hesitated, then sighed. Come up. He arrived with 2 containers of miso soup from the little Japanese place she loved, the one she'd mentioned once, months ago in passing. He didn't say much, just handed her a container, sat on the floor by the window, not the couch, he seemed to sense she needed space, and ate his soup while she worked. Every now and then, he'd glance at her, not with pity but with quiet understanding. When she finally closed her laptop hours later, exhausted, he was still there. You didn't have to stay, she said. I wanted to, he replied, not because I'm trying to fix anything, just because I care. And in that moment, something inside her softened. Not all the way, but enough. The next day, she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She reached out first. Want to walk the dogs at the shelter this weekend? His reply came fast. Yes. They met at the shelter like nothing had changed, and yet everything had. There was a new layer between them now. Honesty, raw and tender. He didn't hide who he was anymore, but he also didn't let it define their time together. He still wore the same flannel shirt, still knelt to tie her shoelace when it came undone, still remembered how she liked her tea, but now when he talked about the future, he didn't say someday. He said, I'm thinking of starting a program that trains people from underserved neighborhoods in green tech. Would you help me design the website? She blinked. Me? You've got a good eye for what feels real, he said. And that's what this needs, not flashy. Just honest. It was the first time he'd asked for her help, not as a favor. But as a partner, still the world outside their bubble wasn't so kind. A few days later, she saw it, a gossip blog headline. Billionaire CEO spotted holding hands with mystery woman at animal shelter. Below it, a blurry photo of them walking dogs, her laughing at something he'd said. Her stomach dropped. She showed him the article on her phone. He read it, then handed the phone back without a word. I'm sorry, he said. I should have warned you this might happen. Does it always happen? She asked. When you're in the public eye, yes. People make up stories. They assume things. They turn quiet moments into drama. She looked at the photo, her hair messy, his shirt stained with mud, both of them smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. It felt like an invasion. What do we do? She asked. We keep living, he said simply. We don't let strangers decide what our story is. But it wasn't that easy. Comments started appearing online. Who is she? Is she after his money? He's dating down. One even said, she looks like his assistant. She didn't tell him about those, but she felt them, like tiny cuts adding up. One night, after a particularly nasty comment thread, she broke down. Not dramatically, just quiet tears in her kitchen while washing dishes. He was there in 10 minutes. She hadn't even called him, he just knew. He didn't say don't cry, didn't say ignore them. He just wrapped her in a hug and held her while she shook. They don't know us, he whispered, and they never will. What we have isn't for them to understand. She buried her face in his shoulder. I just wanted this to be simple. I know, he said. And it can be, if we protect it. From then on, they were more careful. They didn't post photos, didn't go to fancy places where cameras might be. They stuck to the places that felt like theirs, the diner, the park, the garden. The world outside could spin its stories, but inside their little circle, they built something real. Then came the hardest test. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. A major investor was threatening to pull out unless he returned to full visibility. They wanted him back in suits, back on stages, back in the public eye, full-time. He told her over dinner at her place, stirring pasta she'd made. I might have to step back from the garden for a while, he said. From all of this. She froze, fork halfway to her mouth. All of this? He looked at her, eyes full of regret. Not you. Never you. But the volunteering, the quiet days, they might have to pause. She put her fork down. So that's it? Back to the old life? No, he said firmly. Never back to the old life. But maybe a new balance. One that includes both worlds. She didn't answer right away. She thought about all the times he'd chosen the garden over a meeting, the shelter over a gala. Was that about to end? What if I can't be part of that new balance? She asked quietly. What if I'm just too ordinary for your world? He reached across the table and took her hand. You're the least ordinary person I've ever met. And your world, this world is the one that saved me. He paused, then added, if I have to choose between the board and you, I choose you. Every time. She looked into his eyes and saw no hesitation, only truth, but she also knew it wasn't that simple. He wasn't just a man in love, he was a leader, a provider, someone with responsibilities that went beyond their little bubble. So she made a decision. Don't choose, she said. Just don't lose yourself again, and don't ask me to become someone I'm not. He nodded slowly. I won't. The next week he went to the board meeting. She didn't ask for details. But when he came back, he told her he'd proposed a new plan. He'd return to his public role, but only if they supported his community initiatives with real funding and real autonomy. And he'd keep one day a week completely off limits, no calls, no emails, no meetings. Just time for the things that mattered. To his surprise, they agreed. That Saturday, they went back to the garden together. Same as always. He wore the same flannel shirt. She brought extra gloves. As they worked side by side, planting new rows of kale, she finally said what she'd been holding on to. I'm still scared, she admitted. Scared that one day the world will pull you back in and I'll be left behind. He stopped working and turned to her. Then let's build something that can't be pulled apart. Not with money, not with titles, but with trust. She looked at him, really looked. Not at the CEO, not at the disguise, but at the man who'd shown up with soup on her worst night, who remembered her favorite tea, who cried when a rescue dog finally trusted him. Maybe trust wasn't about never getting hurt. Maybe it was about choosing to stay even after you had. She reached for his hand, dirt and all. Okay, she said. Let's try. And in that quiet garden, surrounded by growing things, they began again. Not as the poor man and the woman who didn't know, but as two people who'd seen each other's cracks. And decided to stay anyway. Time didn't fix everything overnight. But it did something quieter, something deeper. It let them build, brick by brick, a life that felt true to both of them. No grand declarations, no fairy tale endings, just small choices made again and again that added up to something real. She kept her job. Still designed logos, still argued with clients about font sizes, still took the bus to work most days. He didn't try to rescue her or suggest she quit to focus on them. Instead, he asked about her projects, remembered the names of her coworkers, and once surprised her by ordering lunch for her whole team after she'd had a rough week, not because he could afford it, but because he knew how much it would mean. He went back to his office, yes. Wore suits when he had to, gave speeches at conferences, sat in meetings that lasted hours. But he also kept his promise. Every Saturday was theirs. No exceptions. Rain or shine, board crisis or not, he showed up at the diner, the garden, or her doorstep, usually with 2 cups of boba tea and a book he thought she'd like. People still talked. Tabloids still ran blurry photos with wild captions, but they stopped reading them. They'd learned the hard way that other people's stories about you don't define your truth. Their truth was in the quiet moments. Him teaching her how to prune tomato vines. Her showing him how to use design software so he could sketch ideas for the community center he wanted to build. The way they'd sit on her fire escape at night, sharing a blanket and watching the city lights flicker on one by one. One spring afternoon, they were back at the same diner where they'd first met. The red awning was a little more faded, the booth slightly more worn, but it felt like home now. They split a slice of pie, cherry, her favorite, and talked about nothing important. The weather, a funny dog they'd seen at the park. Whether pineapple belonged on pizza, they agreed it did not. A young couple sat at the next booth, clearly on a first date. Awkward silences, nervous laughter, the girl checking her phone every few minutes. She watched them and smiled. "Remember how we were?" she asked. He followed her gaze. "I remember how I was terrified you'd think I was boring." "You were the opposite of boring," she said. "You were steady." He looked at her, eyes soft. "And you were the first person in years who made me feel like I didn't have to prove anything." They didn't say "I love you" often. Not because they didn't feel it, but because they'd learned that love wasn't just in the words, it was in the showing up. In remembering how someone takes their coffee, in staying quiet when they needed space, in choosing each other day after ordinary day. Then came the day she walked into his office, not the sleek downtown one, but the small sunlit room he'd set up near the community garden for his nonprofit work. Papers were stacked neatly, plants lined the windowsill, and a framed photo of them at the shelter sat on his desk. He looked up from his laptop, surprised. "Hey, I didn't expect you today." She held out a folder. "I finished the website for the Youth Green Tech program. Wanted to show you in person." He took it, flipping through the mock-ups. His face lit up. "This is perfect. It's warm, real, not corporate at all." "That was the point," she said, leaning against the desk. "These kids don't need flashy. They need to feel seen." He looked up at her, something deep in his eyes. "You always know how to make things matter." She shrugged, but inside she glowed. Because this was what she'd wanted all along. Not to be swept off her feet by wealth or status, but to be a part of something meaningful. And he'd given her that chance not as a favor, but as an equal. Later that week, they attended the program's launch event together. It wasn't held in a fancy hotel ballroom, but in a repurposed warehouse-turned-learning center, filled with teenagers building solar-powered phone chargers and designing vertical gardens. She stood in the back, watching him kneel beside a shy girl who was struggling with a circuit board, patiently guiding her hands without taking over. A reporter approached her, notepad in hand. "You're the designer behind this project, right? What's it like working with someone like him?" She thought for a moment. "It's like working with someone who believes people are worth investing in, not just their ideas, but their hearts." The reporter scribbled that down, but she knew it wouldn't make the headline. The headlines would say, "Billionaire Fund's New Initiative," or "Tech CEO Goes Green." But the real story, the one that mattered, was in the girl's proud smile when her charger finally lit up, in the way he high-fived her like they'd just won a championship. On the walk home, hand in hand, she said, "You know, I used to think love was supposed to change your life in a big, dramatic way. Like fireworks or fate," he squeezed her hand. "And now?" "Now I think it's more like planting a garden," she said. "You don't see the results right away. You just keep showing up, watering, waiting, and one day you look around and realize something beautiful has grown, because you both cared enough to stay." He stopped walking, turned to her, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm glad I stayed," he said quietly. "And I'm even gladder you did." They didn't need rings or announcements or social media posts to prove what they had. Their proof was in the everyday. The way he saved the last dumpling for her, the way she left notes in his lunchbox, the way they still visited the same diner every few weeks, just to remember where they began. One evening, months later, They sat on a bench in the park as the sun dipped below the skyline. A red-tailed hawk circled high above, silent and sure. "Look," she said, pointing. He followed her gaze and smiled. "Still owning the sky. Still not caring if anyone notices," she added. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, watching the hawk ride the wind. No need to fill the space with words. They'd learned that the best moments often happen in the quiet. People passed by, couples holding hands, parents pushing strollers, friends laughing. No one looked twice at them. To the world, they were just two ordinary people sharing a bench. And that was exactly how they wanted it. Because in the end, it wasn't about hidden identities or secret fortunes. It was about two people who chose to see each other, really see each other, and decided that was enough. And sometimes, in a world full of noise and performance, that kind of quiet honesty is the rarest thing of all.